I think we can sense the energy after more than one day of forum, and I must say that looking back at the different topics, talking about the global geopolitical fragmentation, the blue economy, seas and ocean, biodiversity protection, the impact of the acceleration of climate change. There's one thing that, of course, we had to cover is a new narrative for leadership. And what is a responsible leader in an age of profound transformation. And once again, the ORF is ahead of its time. And I must say, I'm extremely proud to be on a female-only panel. It's too often that, it's an all men are falling down. So I think it's a good sign. Thank you, Samir. Thank you so much. And that the friend at ORF are putting this together, I think shows how important the topic of female leadership is, not just for gender equality, but for overall prosperity. And that is, I think, an extremely important feature of the conversation, that it's not just talking about more rights for women, but also greater prosperity and a greater role of women in society is the sine qua non condition of greater prosperity. So without much further ado, I'd like to introduce our great panelists today. We have a wonderful geographical diversity with Midulcina Samari-Brash from Papua New Guinea, who's a development specialist at DevCom Pacific and also serves as a senior advisor on gender equity and women empowerment. Thank you very much for being with us. Also with us today, Baratang Mia, Baratang from South Africa, who's Chief Operating Officer of Deshad AI and Digital Public Infrastructure at the UN in Addis Ababa. And you actually, it's a startup focused on a skills marketplace. So you'll tell us more in a minute. Selma Obarchanin, who is the co-founder and chief marketing officer of So Agency. So you're working at the crossroads of, let's say, new narratives and advertisement and technology. And before that, you were a digital marketing lead for the Sarajevo Film Festival. So I look forward to hearing more about how we integrate arts also in the discussion. A warm welcome. And last but certainly not least, Taluya Jayavardene, a very warm welcome, head of women empowerment at Mass Holding here in Sri Lanka, and you'll tell us more about fashion. So I very much like that we have innovation in the arts here in the discussion on that panel. I'd like to start with a general question to the four of you. I was mentioning the role and the need for greater narrative. And I'd like to start with, there's obviously much progress that has been done in terms of women empowerment, gender equality, but much is still to be done. You come from different countries, different continents, different business backgrounds. So I'd like to ask each of you, what is the most underestimated factor holding women back?
Should I start? I must start firstly by thanking ORF for giving me an opportunity to be on this panel. And to answer your question, I think for me, from my own personal experience and my journey, what's holding women back is leadership and funding. If you open leadership positions for women and you give them a power to make decision-making, the ripple effect of that, because women think on a broader spectrum, they'll think about the village, the community, the future of other women. It gives young women that are behind them to see that I can do that. You can only do something if you see it being role modeled, and the network of women who are in leadership will become bigger. It won't be just the selected few that are there because they know someone. And also skills. My work is more on building the pipeline talent of young women that are coming up so that in future we don't have a situation where what's happening now in the market, there's a lot of jobs that are not being fed with proper skills. And yeah.
While I completely agree with everything you said, I think one thing that we need to acknowledge is, as we work in the corporate sector and we're looking at constantly improving representation of women in management and leadership, because I come from a sector, the apparel sector, where we have good representation of women in the workplace. We're privileged that way, thousands of women in the factories. But as we look at bringing women into leadership, into management, one of the biggest, and I would even go as far to say the biggest challenge we see is the lack of infrastructure and support in terms of the care economy, the disproportionate responsibility that women carry in terms of childcare, home care, elder care, without the infrastructure, without the kind of mindset that is necessary to support men and women both in this space. For me, it is never to say to remove that responsibility or to move women away from care, but to have better balance between men, women, between everyone, between the state, the private sector, and all parties to collaborate in terms of that. Because I think we have not found the most effective or productive way of caring for the next generation, which is crucial for economies. And we've done that in a way where we've drawn a line between the private and the public, and we're missing out on all the talent, the perspective that women bring. So for me, that's where I'd leave it.
Thank you so much, Selma.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really feel privileged and honored to speak with you and share my experience, especially as I took a role in leadership 10 years ago. By the age of 23, I became a CEO of a company that wasn't mine, and I know how bumpy road that was. So basically, the role of women in leadership now is more challenged and crucial than ever. We know that women, when they lead, they really make business grow. They make economies stronger and communities thrive. And yet, we are still navigating the systematic barriers that make it harder for women to access the resources, the networks, and the investment they need. From the communication point of view, and as you said, I'm running a quantum growth agency, which is a holistic approach, combination of strategic communication and business development, but with a plot twist. We are always focusing on campaigns that are oriented to higher purpose, to helping the community. So for me, visibility is really important, and for every women leader. But now visibility isn't enough. Generally, success stories are under-communicated. The real challenge is turning that visibility into positive influence, meaning the ability to shape economic policies, investment trends, but also industry narratives. So today, we do work with women-led businesses, and we're trying to transform their digital presence into a competitive advantage. It's all about how well actually you're able to communicate your value, your story, and your purpose. Women must be strategic in leveraging their voice, super creative when it comes to their content marketing, and then again, data-driven when it comes to storytelling, to position themselves as industry leaders. And with AI revolutionizing everything, especially when it comes to content creation, authenticity is becoming the buzzword. Authenticity is the trend for 2025. Authenticity is way of life. People crave real voices. People crave real stories and real connections. This is where we, as a woman, have advantage, embracing a leadership style that is more relational, that is more community-driven and transparent. I think we all agree on that. Especially now where certain administrative forces are prioritizing the isolation ideology. Read between the lines. But when it comes to finance, you already mentioned, the question is, how do we close those gaps for women entrepreneurs? How do we ensure they're not just participating, but actually they're leading the digital-first economy? One of the biggest obstacles women entrepreneurs face is access to investor pools, fundings, and networks. It's just we have to make a path to decision-making spaces where opportunities are created. And also, many business-led women who are leading the businesses fail to attract those investments, not because they're lacking their potential or the way that they're not working enough. It's just because they aren't positioned effectively in terms of digital marketing in online space. If investor, or in any case, partner, donor, client, sponsor, name it, can't find you if your business model isn't communicated in a proper way, or your civil society organization that it basically isn't cleared enough, or digital brand doesn't build trust, you won't get funded. So I think now I answered those questions and I give you my overview from my experience.
Oh, thank you very much. And I think you've also opened some doors for further discussion. And I'd like to you, Lucina, in terms of what you feel has held women back.
Thank you. Firstly, to ORF, thank you for the invitation to be here today. In my country, I think the really important issue, and that's where we are the biggest Pacific Island nation. There are 14 island states and territories. We have the biggest economy. We're about $42 billion US. We're growing at an exponential population rate of about 4.3%. Which means that according to our own, we're a parliamentary democracy, I beg your pardon, a constitutional democracy. I think the issue and the unit that is most underestimated is the family unit and the productive role of women within it. Girls and boys don't have the same rights, even though we have constitutional protections in my country that demand equality, that demand rights of assembly, that demand rights of speech, and the voice of the media. I think that as the world has shifted and our geopolitics and our geostrategic priorities start to shift in relation to agendas that are set outside of our nations, particularly in the developing South, I think it's important to understand that we are Indigenous people. We've only been in an adopted political system for 50 years. In the case of my country this year, we will celebrate our 50th year of independence from Australia. We achieved independence in 1975. Now, in that very short period of time, we've had to overcome and understand and absorb and adopt political institutions, adopted ideas after being in existence for 40,000 years. Women have always been in the central unit of families and tribes and clans. And I think that if we're going to really understand and develop and create jobs and growth and tax, we have to understand what our familial obligations are. And within every society, and certainly within Indigenous societies, we are mainstream. We make political decisions in my country. Since independence, we've had the constitutional protections. We've been able to create the enabling environment. We've been able to create regulation. We're an extractive destination, so we have gas and oil and gold and copper and nickel and cobalt and every extractive resource you could possibly think of in our part of the world. Because the primary structure is an Indigenous one that adopted colonial structures that were artificial boundaries that were created, conflict has been created. So ideas have been left in our societies and not completely fleshed out, and we've had to understand our adopted systems in a very, very short period of time. I'm not saying we're unique, I'm saying it's a feature of our society. And the most underestimated unit is the family unit. Recently I travelled around my country, and I'm a technical lead to a permanent parliamentary committee on gender equity and women's empowerment. What we witnessed and what we heard on a listening tour around my country was so striking that we have to unlearn our development. Our country is turning on each other. We have remarkable conflict, but we also have remarkable gifts. So unlearning development, how we reform and restructure. Democracy is only as good as the demand for it. And if we don't start in our family units by educating our young and partnering women and girls with youth that are males in critical demographics like your 15 to 35-year-olds, and understanding that education is not just education and formal education inside a classroom. Our education is where our land sits, where our ancestors died, where they married, on what terms we settled on particular plots of land. And learning development is a very, very important feature, I think. And I think a refocus has to be on the family unit, the clan and the tribe, and our adopted systems have to be inverted now in order for development to progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that powerful testimony to how long a journey your country has walked and the kind of tremendous achievements you've done. I was saying earlier that, you've opened a door. You've actually just opened a door. I didn't mean to ask the question, but, you stirred reflections. And I remember hearing you speaking about family and traditions, what Gandhi said about education. Educate a boy and you will train a citizen. Educate a woman and you will invest in a family. Do you think that development policies, I know you've been working a lot with development agencies, have got that they really understand that there's a real difference in the investment you make between boys and girls, and in terms of the impact of the investment on longer term prosperity, girls should be the priority. And sometimes, having worked also with development agencies, I've had the feeling that they have a very European or Northern or Western bias, that societies are individualistic and traditional forms of family are of a bygone era, which is the case for just a tiny part of the world population, mostly the West.
Yes, I think we can sit and blame and be spectators in our own communities and in our own societies as mainstream, as decision makers. We have an obligation. What kind of ancestors do we want to be? There's a very short period of time as we populate the earth, and with changing times, the world is coming to us. In my country, in a very short period of time, over 18 months, we've had most of the leaders of the world come to Papua New Guinea. Prime Minister Modi was there recently. We've had the Indonesian president. The Australian Prime Minister has visited us a few times. Our non-traditional friends have amped up their presence. The Americans are of course, in Papua New Guinea now. Through the layers of our macroeconomics, our geopolitics, our geostrategic, and certainly the pivots that are happening in our jurisdictions. As host governments, we have an obligation to prioritise. So I think that when I say unlearning development, as we sit at the table, we have the constitutional benefit in my country to sit at the table, at the negotiating table. So when we negotiate oil and gas and the extractive industries, our Indigenous people have an opportunity to sit at the table to define on what terms the benefit sharing returns to our communities. Now, if we don't educate our people, we don't have the power to sit with a powerful developer at the table and understand when they've got legal teams that stretch for as far as the eye can see, that are up, competing to negotiate for their benefit shares. The invisible nature of gender in most jurisdiction means that the gender voice is left outside of the conversation. So that appears in climate, that appears in gender-based approaches in social inclusion. It appears in the macroeconomic terms that we define for ourselves. But if we actually drill down into the nuts and bolts, the important features are obviously jobs and growth. The majority of our populations are not educated. So the innovative strategies that the Foreign Minister has just spoken of, I think Mr. Count spoke yesterday very definitively about the risk, or the fear of, nations in the South becoming technological colonies of the United States and China in particular. is a lesson that we really need to take home. How do we participate effectively in those spaces? We can't do it if our people aren't being educated. They don't know how to call out bad behaviour, whether it's happening by the host government or if it's happening by the donors, if they don't know what they're looking at. And so I'll leave the conversation there, and I'm happy to answer further questions. But I think, yes, the importance for us in particular is using what the world is, where the world is now. COVID taught us a million things. It taught us that we don't have to be connected to the rest of the world. It taught us that we can and should do things from our homes. We can work remotely. We can do things differently. So I'll leave it there.
No, thank you. I think it's also, the reconnecting with our own ecosystems and local communities. And sometimes we've seen also the backlash against international trade and economic integration. Baratang, because Dulcina just mentioned the technology and the risk of turning into, for so many countries, including Europe, by the way, digital technologies. You've worked a lot on what I mentioned, the skills platform. How has technology driven the gender revolution, especially when it comes to jobs and skills?
Maybe I should start with what COVID taught us, because that's where you almost ended. What COVID taught us is that the boundary of an office is meaningless, because most of the time women couldn't choose certain jobs because they have to prioritize family. Family is very important to any woman. I think that's what's holding them back. In fact, we should be talking about that. So most women wouldn't want to be promoted in jobs by choice because they don't want the burden of family and the burden of work. So it was always a decision between family and work progression, career progression. So what COVID did was it broke down barriers. And it also taught men that you have to participate in your family because they can't sit there and do nothing. They had the freedom to be part of family. Now, the digital platforms became it. Even the people who couldn't adopt it in the past, all of a sudden they were willing to work online. We saw technical companies growing. Zoom became it because of COVID. So what we do with saying digital platform and people should be on the skills set that can allow them to work from anywhere, anyhow, is because it allows women to join the job market easily. And it takes away, if recruiters are doing their job properly, it takes away the issue of, oh, you are a woman. Like women, 90% of the time between age 23 and 25, it's where they really held back because they start families. Now it takes away that barrier. I have a family, I can work from home. You don't have to be thinking those little tedious things that don't go to the boardroom to be discussed, why women are not progressing. And it also allows women to access people they wouldn't access under any circumstances. Let me tell you a little bit about myself, how I met ORF. I did a TED Talk online 2015-16. Samir watched it. The moment he watched it, he decided there and there in that year, I'm going to invite Baradan to come and speak at our conference. I was speaking about cybersecurity at the time. And it's almost 10 years, and ORF has grown my career exponentially. But it has nothing to do with them as a person. It's the platforms they've created for me and the space. So I feel like once a woman has been given a platform that has no barriers, that doesn't look, what tech does, it does not know gender, unless the algorithm is coded that way. But that is something that we can work around if we open the door for women.
Thank you. But you mentioned Samir. I think what is needed is also leaders outside who act as allies. And I think a big kudos to Samir on that.
He's a great ally for, maybe, I'm not throwing him chocolates. I'm just telling the truth. Samir is a great ally for women. He does a lot of work to make sure. And a great ally of Africa. I know lots of African women who could never have had a platform to speak anywhere. And I met them here, and we all are always given a platform to speak at policy level issues, which is the biggest thing for me now that we've got a circus happening in the world. I don't know what to call it, but there's something happening. And there's a very powerful man doing whatever he feels like doing, waking up in the morning and saying, I'm not going to talk to South Africa anymore. So if Trump's continue the way he is continuing, and the women are not giving policy platforms where can they influence and talk about issues, because this issue of merit-based will eliminate space in the decision making for women who look like me, who speaks like me, who come from spaces that I come from, because we've been excluded for more than 400 years. It's not 20 years, it's not 30 years. It's years and generations of embedded exclusion of Black women, embedded exclusions of women in spaces. So if we do not deal with indigenous issues that are holding us, people who look like me, backwards, he's going to win. It takes him 5 years to win.
No, thank you. That's a very powerful personal story. But I think what you've mentioned with Semi also says a lot about the leadership of India and Prime Minister Modi in terms of, advancing women's rights and understanding that greater power and recognition of their power of women is crucial to boost prosperity. And I think that needs to be recognized and appreciated. I'd like to turn to you, Tanuja. I know you've worked a lot on the workplace, both digital now after COVID and in person. I'd want to ask you, what impact have you seen in terms of innovation and creativity having more women at higher level position in the workplace?
Thank you for that question. As I said, we're an industry that is driven by women, built on the backs of women, the apparel sector. And for us, we are an organization that set up a homegrown program more than 21 years ago to address gaps for the women, because we could see the gaps. We could see whether it was reproductive health, whether it was violence in the home and in the community, skill gaps, and so on. Having done that work, we still looked at ourselves about 7 years ago and thought, we're not happy with where we're at in terms of representation in the boardroom, in terms of management. And that also required us to look at the way we work. We're in manufacturing. So, you spoke of flexibility, the ability to work from wherever. That becomes crucial because for women, while that flexibility is necessary for men and women both, for women, it's a decision between working or not. So for us at a factory floor level, a lot of the work is shift-based, which means you can work a certain number of hours and you go home. So you had some balance. But bringing women into management and leadership meant that they had to work office hours. They had to work the regular shift. And that becomes difficult. For us, what we recognize and acknowledge is, as a business, we need the perspective. We need this for business. It's not only to say it is fair, it is the right thing to do, of course it is, but it is also necessary for better decision making, for more innovation. And over the years, I would say, let's say the last 7 years, we have consciously looked at intervention, setting goals, setting deliverables for our leaders in terms of representation of women in management. And to support that, we need mentorship, sponsorship, networking, training everyone on unconscious bias reduction, looking at how we recruit, where our talent management systems are at, monitoring and measuring our numbers. Having done that, we are seeing, so today we have 21% women on our board. We have 26% women in management in the manufacturing sector, which to us is progress. We are seeing more women being recruited into manager positions from outside the organization. Now, we do struggle in terms of women in engineering. We have specific programs looking at women in industrial engineering. We have focused attempts and interventions to look at women in technical roles. Having done all of that, we are seeing an increase in representation. We are seeing movement. But we are also seeing more innovation. So if I touch on, we have an organization dedicated to innovation. And one of the main pillars in that organization is femtech, where while we are a manufacturer, we are solutions provider in apparel and textile, something that is grown from within, not so much as an ask from the customer, but developed within is the femtech pillar, which looks at everything from menarche to menopause. So everything from your period underwear to urinary incontinence to maternity wear, and also menopause supportive product. That is something that we've seen developed in-house by ourselves and where we hold intellectual property. And if I take the femtech pillar for MAS, we have 11 innovators, out of which 8 are women. Out of those 8 women, we have 5 who have patents granted in the space of femtech for them. I have one who's got a patent pending right now. So it is very clear to us, and we have first-hand experience of why we need more women in that space of innovation, recognizing the gaps for issues that women have dealt with and gone unnoticed for too long. To date, menopause products are not sexy or glamorous, and it's very difficult to get customers to take them on. But we've been driving that work. We see more interest in the period products. We see more interest in the urinary incontinence and the maternity wear, which is great. We are seeing bigger brands asking for this technology. Even in the menopause product where we have developed solutions, we are now seeing a little more traction. It's not easy. It's not an easy business case. But it is very, very clear to us why working in that space and why having more women in leadership helps to drive that work, helps to find solutions in a space where otherwise this gets discarded or kind of dismissed as not having the most business benefit.
Thank you. It's also a question of mindset that you introduce, and I think that's such a powerful story you shared. I'd like to somehow build on that question of creativity and mindset and turn to you, Selma. You've conducted lots of very successful and ambitious online campaign. That's what we call digital advocating. And we've heard over the past half an hour how strong bias and prejudices could still be. So can you tell us more about how much change a successful digital campaign be when it comes to convincing people, and especially leaders? They need to change the way they approach female leadership.
Yeah, it's a great question. Also, I really want to share that I'm really happy to hear all of those great panelists, great energy. So I think this is connected to sustainability, but also profitability. It's a combination with creativity. And sustainability and profitability are often seen as competitive forces, but they don't have to be. Women-led businesses are already driving eco-consciousness models. So we'll share experience from our agency we had 2 years ago. Women-led business wanted to position themselves, but they didn't have funds. So we had to be very creative. We wrote down a project proposal to European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and we got funds. What we did for the restaurant, for that lady, is that we brought scuba diving club, to clean the bottom of the river in front of the restaurant to do the promotion. It was a great initiative. All civil society organization, along with the commercial sector, get motivated, and they did the same. So the key was ensuring that the messaging was proper, that was purpose-driven, and it was authentic. Still, we were oriented towards data and results, so they could attract conscious consumer without failing to the trap of greenwashing. So we have to distinguish that. So it's an important lesson for all of us. If we don't own our sustainability narratives, someone else will do for us. They will define it for us. Consumers are more informed than ever, and they expect business to back up their claims with action. This means using digital marketing not only as a platform, not only as a sales tool, more as a synergy where we combine transparency, advocacy, and education, the most important thing, because education and knowledge give us self-confidence that we need as a ladies in business. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's so interesting to see how I started this discussion by stressing how important narratives were. What the power of the image on people's behaviors and mindsets, and how easy sometimes it is to change it. So sometimes cliches and prejudices just hold something so thin that what it calls for is just a strong coalition of the willing to turn it over. We have 10 minutes left, and there's still so many people in the audience. Do we have questions by any chance? There might be a microphone somewhere. If there are questions, just raise your hand, or we'll stay with our panelists. Yes, the gentleman in the front. Could we have a microphone for the gentleman, or you just speak very loudly? I will likely hear it and repeat it. That's also an option. No, I think it's coming, right. Talking about technology, here it is.
Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Faris. I also come from Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'd like to, it's more of a statement rather than a question, an observation. I used to head the United Nations Population Fund in Bosnia, and we dealt primarily with issues of maternal health, sexual and reproductive health, gender equality, empowerment of women. And for me, at one session we had a gentleman from the Vienna Institute of Population do a population presentation study. And I remember it was very striking for me that he was referring to population by the number of women, and in particular by the number of women in reproductive age, and it was an explanation. And it wasn't, that was a very striking example of, and I really find it fascinating that in 2025 we're still talking about some of these issues as if we're ages back. Everything begins and ends with women. We're all here. I mean, I'm being very crude, but women are the essence and the greatest treasure of humanity. And empowering women is what gives societies the boost and future progress, the core of the values and the future prospect of a certain society. And I think that we've been lost in a way in a lot of talk about women's empowerment and different, a lot of, also a lot of lingo and acronyms, that we lose the sense of the core. And I think this is something that needs to be, for me, that was very striking. And for a lot of the colleagues, you look at it in a completely different way. There's not it's a man versus woman or, gender versus gender. It's, there's a core, and then everything else is built around that with, and I think that's something that needs to be propagated and known, because I think the views would be changed significantly.
Thank you very much. But Justina, is this something you want to take? Because there's a reference to at some point development policy and or not. Feel free to reject the ball.
Sure. Thank you. Yes, you're exactly right. It is 2025, and sometimes it feels like we're stuck in this time warp, where equality is a philosophy and a notion that is so intangible, when in actual fact, where I come from, we're 52% of the population. Acknowledging that, right, we're the first teachers of our children. Before our children even reach academic institutions, guaranteed there will be at least 4 years of learning that happens in proximity, largely with women. I think, when I talk of inverting our system and our structures, I think it's really important to learn. If we're dealing with donor conditionality, if we're dealing with governance, the proposition of transparency and accountability, many of those strictures and structures are gender blind. We talk about climate and we talk about resilience and all of these high-level priorities that we sign off on international conventions and regional treaties. But the reality comes back to this idea that we're forgetting who populates these structures and these systems and on what basis. So I mean, if we don't humanize our own thinking and encourage, I mean, I would like to see a time where reform in our jurisdictions looks at giving the prominence to teachers, the same as a veterinary scientist or as a medical doctor or as an engineer or a lawyer, so that the prominence is given again to educators, so that the chances are that education and within it, the other half of the population do get recognised. Now, when we have these conversations that are non-technical, non-institutional, we're either criticised of hugging trees or it's too flowery. But the reality is we've gone about development in exactly the same way since the Bretton Woods institutions and the start of World War II. We're facing conflict in all of our regions. And the world has now shifted to a new order that we all have to face up to. And I think it is important. And I think there is the universe has told us recently, rethink the way you're doing things. COVID taught us that. Commerce, the way we travel, the way we don't travel, the way we can do isolation, some better than others. So back to your point, I think the issue is, and I think for us, the importance is actually refocusing. I stood in 2 general elections in my country, and after the fact, I've gone back to advocate to young women and girls and to young men that we should stop putting our hands up to run for parliament. We need to run to be a ward councillor. We need to be the president in our local level government, where at the coalface, the greatest population exists. So signing off on our trade agreements and economic cooperation and development cooperation and defence cooperation means nothing if our people at the coalface are not equipped, and it generally starts in the family unit. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Baratang, on that point.
I think it goes country by country, region by region, the progression. There's a lot of progress being made. So from Africa, I'm South African. Beautiful country with all the progression being made. I won't speak for every other African country because I think there's lots of challenges. And I went to the Internet Governance Forum last year at the conference. There was a huge session, almost the size of this room, where people were discussing education of women in Afghanistan. That's something Malala fought for. And the decision was flipped around by change of leadership, or something happened. And so issues of the isms, I call them isms, they go back and forth. You think, oh, we've made progress. Then you realize, oh my gosh, new leadership came. And for them, the priority might be family. Women must be at home. So when they say family, they mean a woman must stay home, lead the family. Meaning women can't get jobs, women cannot be promoted, women cannot be educated. So this, I guess the UN is dysfunctional itself in making sure that there is quota systems and prioritizing to make sure that this issue, we don't go back and forth generation-wise. And I think technology is gonna shake all of us. Literally, I had to change my words. It's gonna bring a lot of drama because the people that are going to be left behind now are the same people that are not being empowered. You know, men have been promoting each other, giving each other jobs, not skilling themselves. And women are getting empowered and getting powerful. We need to not leave anyone behind. And I'm just going to leave it there because it's chaos.
Thank you. I think it's a very powerful thing you just stressed, that we run the risk now of losing the gains, the hard-won gains of the past decades, if we do not ensure that women, and especially young girls in remote communities, are tech-savvy and digital equipped, if I may say so. I think this is a very important point. So we have 2 minutes left, and I'd like to build on what has just been said by asking the four of you in 1 or 2 words, what makes you, after what I've just said, confident as you look to the future?
The future of leadership isn't just about breaking barriers, it's redesigning the system altogether. And we really have to embrace feminine energy. And when I say feminine energy, I mean changing the collaboration, really collaboration over competition. I mean changing sustainability over short-term profits. And I mean authenticity, changing authenticity over ChatGPT, AI, and everything which is generic. And then perfection. Thank you.
Yeah, if I might, I just want to take from two things Jelsina and the two speakers said. One about leadership at all different levels, because that's something we do see. In my industry, in our organization, you have leadership at different levels, and women who I think, especially with the private sector, with corporates, with manufacturing and industry overall, women taking leadership at every level of the organization and also being supported to take leadership in their communities. We have women entrepreneurs, while they do the work in our organization, while they work in the factories, they will start their own business using the skill development work we've had. So that is, for me, one of the things that gives us confidence, the fact that you are seeing, because we've started the work, we've come through in this journey to a point. So I think the strength and the confidence that women have just needs a little bit of support and that empowerment to do what they want to do. So that leadership at every different level, whether it is a home, whether it is a community, at every level of the organization, and also the connecting of men and women, the allies, the absolute need for that, because we see women who are empowered in rural Sri Lanka, in India, in Bangladesh, in Indonesia, where we're working, and they know their rights, they know what they want, they are breadwinners in most of our families. We cannot, though, afford to have the men being left behind, because we are seeing that as a problem, not being able to accept and support and also come along on that journey. So while that sounds like a challenge, the confidence that I have is we have women who understand. If you take countries like Sri Lanka, who are educated, who are confident, who are willing to come forward and take on leadership. And we have started the work, and I think what we need to do is progress in bringing the men along, in bringing everyone along to make sure we don't slide back. So I think loud voices and intent, genuine intent to carry the work forward is the only thing that we need. Okay.
Thank you. And in 2 words, I'm said that I should wrap it up. You saw I'm being put under pressure, which is good. I like pressure. So just in 1 word.
For me, is progression. There's a lot of women's voice is allowed nowadays, and at the same time, leadership of women is big. It's not just something anymore. Women leader is a woman leader. They're leading their countries. They're becoming presidents. And that the stats that I started with, just to close, when I started women in tech, 10% of women were leaders in tech. Now it's 48% of women in the tech leadership. So there is something happening. There is progression.
I love it. I love it. And one last word.
Yes, we have hundreds more engineers. We've got econometric modelling specialists. We've got 737 captains as women in my country. In 50 years, we've been able to achieve a remarkable amount. Diplomacy is changing around us too. We're now dealing with sport diplomacy, so it's possible that the world is shifting and institutions can change their thinking and give prominence to the units that actually are going to drive economies and therefore improve the lives of not just women, but families and communities and nations.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful discussion, and a big hand of applause for our 4 outstanding leaders. Thank you very, very much.